Welcome again. I'm Maritza, and I am very thrilled to have this important conversation with you about addiction. We are not afraid here at Conscious Conversations to have these discussions about topics that really others may steer away from, and we find it very important to spark these types of conversations because we know through storytelling and discussion it can help so many people in their own experiences and journeys in life. We are welcoming several of you here tonight to discuss this topic live. So we have the wonderful Craig Harper, who I think many of you will know. Take one guess of what his podcast is called. The science right behind him, the U Project. And
I'm embarrassed. I didn't realise. That's embarrassing. Oh my
How
God.
embarrassing, Craig. And then, of course, we've got Mick Hall from Dayhab, who's here to share his experiences with his own personal addiction with us today and his journey into turning his life around. And we've got Sandy, who is an amazing psychologist, who's going to be sharing her insights with us today as well. Now, I want to keep this as interactive as possible. So I know a lot of you have been in contact already in preparation for tonight and have shared the fact that perhaps some of your family members are going through addiction at the moment and you want to know a way in order to help them. Perhaps you have a line of family members who have addictive personalities, or so it's called, and you want to make sure the triggers aren't there for you. There's a million different possibilities and unique stories that can potentially pop up tonight. We want, as I said, to keep it open and interactive. So we have the chat function via Zoom. I'm sure all of you have used Zoom before. So if there's a question that pops up throughout this discussion, feel free to throw your question in the chat and we'll try and address it. So we will jump in to real talk on addiction. As I said, it's an important conversation and we want to bring awareness and support to the issue that is affecting so many of us around the world in different ways. The panel here tonight, they're all very different people with very different backgrounds. Craig and Mick have actually worked together at Dayhab for many years previously. Sandy has her own unique experience with dealing with clients with addiction, and it's going to be interesting to see how they all verbalize their perception on this and what we can gain from their knowledge and experiences. So welcome again to all three of you.
Thanks, Maritza.
So I'm going to start with you, Sandy. Can you tell us from your experience as a psychologist, what have you seen in your clients to be the biggest triggers of addiction?
Well, I guess my practice is not dedicated to addiction, but where I probably learnt the most was when I was a forensic psychologist in the maximum security men's prison, Barwon Prison and Melbourne Assessment Prison. And I worked on a daily basis with men of critical psychosocial needs. And concurrently, I see some of those clients in my private practice. And I guess and again, it's not a specialty of mine, but it's part and parcel of the people that I deal with and people that have come to me. And I guess just in between, probably what's more known just recently is, and I've got his permission, authorised written permission, and it was on a current affair with Mark Thompson was one of my clients from Essendon Football Club. And it was really interesting. You know, I've been on TV on Channel 9 for over 10 years. I've written a column every week in the Herald Sun for 10 years. Like I've had sort of quite a psychological profile, yet my alignment with Mark sparked I got absolutely smashed with inquiries about addiction. It was a real eye-opener to me that whilst I've been, I have a reasonable public profile, this one discovery of this man who I encouraged to go onto ACA and talk about, and felt that he had an obligation to share because I feel that had so much to offer, of which he was happy to embrace. And I guess probably no surprise to anyone who's worked with people who have addictions with substance abuse, it's fairly much rooted in a trauma of some kind, whether that's developmental trauma, whether that's a family trauma, whether that can even be stuff like educational trauma, literacy, undiagnosed learning difficulties, support systems, difficulty in articulating emotions, language wrapping around mental health. So they're the sorts of things that I've seen. And these mental health issues, it's again, no surprise that it's comorbid with mental health issues. So when I'm talking to people or dealing people with addiction, that is not actually generally my primary focus. What I want to know is the etiology. I want to know what's gone on. I take a fairly extensive history of their lives, of their family, what's called a genogram. And I try and understand over a period of time what those triggers are. And there's some talk about addiction actually being a craving disorder, that we actually should talk about it as a craving disorder. And is it relief seeking rather than pleasure seeking? And I actually, in my limited experience, would agree that it's very much a relief seeking avenue for mood stability, for pain that people are suffering, for grief or loss that they're suffering, and they have no other resource or social system around them to support them in that process of pain or grief or loss or hurt or damage or violence or whatever it is. I've also worked with a lot of women who are victims of crime, so I've prepared a lot of reports for court and a lot of psycho-legal reports. So women, I've also witnessed a lot of women. So not only have I worked with the men in prison, I've also dealt with the women who are victims of those men in prison as a result of impaired judgment, poor consequential thinking, irrational thoughts, paranoia, psychosis. And the overarching theme for me is I'm left with a great deal of sadness at the pain and the trauma that a lot of people who have substance abuse endure.
That's quite interesting. So it's an escape mechanism from what you're feeling and how you're experiencing life, or what you may have experienced.
That's my experience.
Yeah. So Mick, I'd love to hear from your perspective and your personal journey with addiction. Do you believe that stemmed from some type of trauma or an escape of who you felt you were at the time?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting sort of avenue to go down. In some respects, I think that, from my experience, and I mean, I've got personal experience, as in I'm a recovering addict myself. I'm 20 years clean and sober from heroin addiction, alcoholism, and other drugs. But I also work in the field, and I've basically worked as a professional in the drug and alcohol field for almost 20 years, so for 18 years. And I've run a treatment centre for the last 10 years. And it's amazing, there are all kinds of things or conditions that happen that cause a person to sort of slip into that addictive, pathway. And my experience is it's not always trauma. In fact, quite often people can go through trauma and not become addicts, and actually have an unbelievable life and can handle it fantastic. It's normally the addicts that head down the addict path. And by that I'm saying is that a trauma or something like that can be involved, and that can trigger, initially set off the addiction. But my experience tells me that the addiction is already there, and it can be dormant, and then it is ignited, much like the gas pilot light on a heater. It's lit, and once it's lit, it's on like Donkey Kong. And then what happens is that it's an illness that continues a person to keep repeating and doing the same thing over and over again, despite negative results, despite negative consequences. And the power of choice is taken from that person. And if a person is, I guess, consciously choosing to use something to escape a trauma, that's one thing. That can be abuse, that can be drug abuse or alcohol abuse. But when we start to get into dependence, that's a different ballgame. That's a different beast. That's a different tiger. That's something that that really grabs a person. And I think I loved what Sandy was saying in terms of one of the things I heard you saying there was about being able to articulate emotions, you know, and I quite often get asked, how can I best, you know, help my loved one, my child, whoever it is, to not become addicted? You know, and most people think I'm going to say, sure, let's educate them about drugs. Let's tell them the dangers of the drugs. Let's do the old government campaign where just say no and all this sort of stuff, right? That's wonderful. But the most effective way to help a child to, you know, mitigate the risk of becoming an addict is to help them to understand how to articulate their emotions. You know, that is the key thing. And the better that kids can get at talking about how they feel, the less likely, it's not a preventative or a cure, but the less likely they are to go down the path of seeking emotional relief. You know, and the emotional relief doesn't have to come from trauma, right? You know, most addicts that I talk to, and myself included, say that when we were born, from when we can first remember, we feel like we've been dropped on the wrong planet. Like, we don't feel right. We're not comfortable in our own skin for no apparent reason. Sometimes there's trauma. Sometimes there's nothing but a loving, beautiful home. But for some reason, you know, we don't feel comfortable in our own skin. But we don't even know that we don't feel comfortable in our own skin as a child until somehow, some way along the track, through peer pressure or just through circumstance, we have a drink or a drug and we go, oh my God, that is complete relief. I didn't even know that I felt like that, but now I feel fantastic. It's an absolute relief. And that's, you know, and that's just one of the pathways that a person can slip into addiction.
How did it all start for you? I know it happened quite young for you, and I've heard your story. Could you share a little bit with everyone today on how, you know, the starting point on this journey?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Maritza. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm one of the ones that I believe that I was an addict and an alcoholic waiting to happen. So I had all of the hallmarks of addiction well before I ever drank or used. As far as I'm concerned, addiction comes in people. It doesn't come in bottles and substances. A bit of physical addiction does, but it comes in people, you know, and I had the hole in the soul, the emptiness, the loneliness, the unsure of myself, frightened, all of that stuff. I was a beautiful natured little boy. But I had all of that stuff inside. I was, without knowing how to articulate it then, I was absolutely traumatized by life, but there was nothing to be traumatized because nothing happened. Everything was okay. I was just frightened, you know, and so I felt, you know, different to everyone else. And when I started high school, so I was 12 and a half, I started high school. I went in Melbourne here in the eastern suburbs, I went to Sindel Tech, and it was a pretty rough school back in the day. And I went to Sindel Tech, and I was just absolutely racked with anxiety, fear, unsure of myself, all of that stuff. And I was unable to deal with it. So I would wag school, you know, and I was a chronic wagger, you know, and when one day when I wagged school, there was a guy a little bit older than me down the train line whose nickname was Monkey. And Monkey whistled out to me and said, "Hey, Mick, do you want to get pissed?" And I didn't even really know what that was. And I said, "Yeah, okay." And he got on his push bike and rode to Mount Waverley Shops, and he picked up 2 bottles of port each. I didn't even know what port was. He handed me the bottle. I unscrewed the top, and the pungent smell of the port came and hit my nose, and it smelled terrible. I put the bottle to my mouth, tasted the port in my mouth, and it tasted worse than it smelled. And then when that alcohol hit my stomach, oh my goodness, it felt unbelievable. I had complete and utter relief. And I fell into a sordid love affair with the grog, you know. And even at that young age, the next hallmark of addiction was lit within me that day. So we know that there's a physical, you know, addiction. We know that there's a neurological addiction, the dopamine dump that happens in the brain that gives that complete relief. That's part of it. But there's also the psychological side of addiction, which is the obsessional side. the mental obsession. And when I was 12 and a half years old, the mental obsession began for me. And my technical term for the mental obsession is the itty bitty shitty committee, right? So the little voices in here that never ever stop, that wind up like a turbine, that start saying things to me like, when's the next opportunity I can drink? How could I get it? Who could I get to buy it for me? Who can I, where can I hide it? Can I drink when I get there? Just this constant ticking around. I was looking for the next opportunity to be able to feel that feeling again, to have that experience again as a young boy. And that's where it began for me. And it just built and built from there, and caused me a lot of problems in my life.
Can I just interrupt and say what you said then, just listening to you, Mick, was exactly what I said, was very much bound up in a developmental history.
Yep.
You were fearful, you were frightened, you were full of anxiety.
Yep.
I don't know what the level of parental oversight is, but from a psychologist's view, that is perfect developmental psychology, where a child has been missed. And
Yep.
if you're racked with anxiety, to quote your words, which I wrote down, that was missed. So the relief seeking that you then got from addiction fits perfectly into that paradigm.
Yeah.
Very much bound in developmental issues that have been avoided.
I agree. I have to agree there. Absolutely, and lots of people tried to help me, and child of the 70s.
Yep.
I know I don't look it, but I'm 50.
You don't.
But yeah, child of the 70s, and very and again, no one to tell me how to deal with my emotions, how to identify them, how to talk about them, how to deal with what was going on. It was a naive, ignorant time.
Yes.
And I was taken to doctors where they put me on psychiatric medications like Largactil and and all that sort of stuff, and of course it didn't work, it didn't help. So the relief I sought was through drugs and alcohol, really. I mean, I went from alcohol to drugs pretty quickly. And that devastated my life. That devastated my education. I left school at 14 and a half because the government gave me an exemption. They said, we cannot get this guy to go to school. And when he does, he's just nothing but trouble. We'll let him go. But again, that's because of the times that I was in. I mean, that was just tragic that a young person was just able to leave school like that, because they're uncontrollable and can't attend. There was just no help. So anyway, I don't blame anyone. It's just it's a condition that I had that there was no apparent cause for, because I've got a loving mum and dad that are still together now. My dad is my best mate, and I have an unbelievable relationship with my mum. So there was nothing wrong at home. I just so happened to have this condition, and but I just didn't know how to deal with it, and didn't even know that I had it until I drank and got relief. I went,
It's really interesting coming from, a lot of different perspectives, whether, we're raising teenage children or, we ourselves are experiencing these feelings. There's a lot of different angles where this could come from and where we can look at this from. But for you started at such a young age, and what was the lifespan of your addiction? How many years were you involved in this journey with drugs and alcohol?
I was involved from the age of 12 and a half to the age of 30. I got clean and sober. Oh. So it was a long journey. It was a long journey for what I went through, because, what I went through, I wouldn't wish upon anyone. From literally living on the streets for 10 years in homeless men's shelters all over Australia, to, I might have met you somewhere, Sandy, because I did time in most of the prisons in Victoria.
I wasn't going to say a word.
And did time up in Queensland. So,
I still see some of my boys on the streets. I can't
probably muck around with a couple of the fellas, but so. Oh, dearie me, Oh, yeah. Gee,
But your story is so true, and this mental health issue. This, what we're so much more educated now about mental illness, mental health, looking at kids, and my training is twofold: masters in forensic psych and masters in developmental. And in doing the forensic, 50% of the course is tied up with developmental. So, you know, and most of the men in the prison have been on substances of one stage or another.
That's right.
You know, they've got their brains pickled because of it, and they miss out on education, and they're inarticulate to express their emotions. And then they're disenfranchised because half the time they can't read or write, you know. So really, it's just this incredible, impoverished life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nick, I'd love to ask, and someone sent this question through, and I was about to ask it too, but what for you was the tipping point to you making that change in your life and becoming clean?
Oh, the tipping point. Yeah, I like the way you put that. It would be awesome if it was nice and light and fluffy, and I said, you know what, I've just had enough of this. I'm going to turn this around. You know, that would be heroic, and I would actually like to be able to say that, but that's not actually what happened. I guess the tipping point for me and a lot of people, let's get serious about this for a second. Addiction is a fatal condition for many, many people. If it's not dealt with properly and the person doesn't find some sort of recovery, they can have a very poor quality of life, and many pass away. So it is a serious condition. And for me, the tipping point for me was, you know, I had to finally get to that point where I could completely and utterly surrender. In recovery groups, we have a saying called, you got to surrender to win. How does that work? How do you win if you give up and you surrender? You know, and I guess the keystone to that is that, you know, when I stopped fighting and trying to control my addiction, or trying to live with it in terms of actively using and drinking, and I admitted complete defeat, that it had more power over me than I had over it, I was able to stay away from it. You know, it's a real mindset shift. And the only way that I could come to that point, unfortunately, I couldn't study my way to it. I couldn't counsel my way to it. I couldn't, you know, read my way to it. It was done through pure, unadulterated pain and degradation. The booze and the drugs brought me to my knees enough when I was in enough pain, and I was able, the penny dropped, I was able to reach out, to ask for help, to get that help, and to do everything I could to engage in that help, because I was frightened of going back. Now, I've got a fairly extreme story. I understand that. And, you know, not everybody has to go to the end of the line. We say in the recovery community, you don't have to get on the bus and take it to the terminus. You can get off at any stop. You know, when enough's enough, you can get off at any stop. But the key to it is recognizing that you've had enough pain, and then finding help, finding real help, you know, a real solution. And it's more than the love of family. If the love of family could cure addiction, oh my goodness, we'd all be skipping around the world. But it doesn't work that way. Addiction's more powerful than love, than of children. I mean, how many people, Sandy, you know this, how many people, you know, that, you know, get their kids taken off them, and all they've got to do is do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 clean neurons, and they can see their kids, and they're unable to do it. That's not because they don't love their kids.
Of course.
They're addicts.
Yep, absolutely.
We will jump into how support is, you know, how we can offer support to loved ones that we have in our lives who may be experiencing this. But I do want to introduce Craig as well. He's sitting there so patiently, and I want to hear more also about your story, Mick, because there's so much more to it. But Craig has a very different side of what he's dealt with addiction, and it's I believe, Craig, you've never drank or taken drugs, have you?
Super boring. I'm literally listening to these two. I'm a fraud. I shouldn't be here, but I would love to hear more from the other two. But so my background is, I've never drunk, I've never smoked, but I think if I had have opened the door on drinking, I would have been a world champion, because I do have an addictive personality. So I mean, addiction is a big scale. And what you know, Sandy and Mick are talking about is really the life changing, and as Mick said, the sometimes life ending stuff: drugs, alcohol, you know, gambling probably won't kill many people physically, but it kills lots of things, you know, and there are lots of really, really dark, deep addictions that are for the general public very hard to get their head around. But I mean, I've always been a bit obsessive, a bit addictive. I was a morbidly obese kid, so I was the fattest kid in my school. And then I discovered exercise. Well, then I went from exercising a bit to exercising a lot to exercising all the time to exercising when I was injured to then I became fanatical and obsessive about my body and my appearance and food. And so, you know, I was very, you know, a lot of the things that I was doing, which was telling lies, which was hiding behaviors, which is being irrational, making stupid decisions, are reflective or consistent of or with an addict. So I remember injuring my ankle badly, went to the doctor. We thought it was broken. It wasn't broken, but it was a really, really bad tear of my ligaments. And I was told not to weight bear for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, walk with crutches, wouldn't be able to run for 2 months, maybe 3 months. And at that stage of my life, I was totally addicted to running. And I would run. I don't know if you know this story, Mick. Have I ever told you this?
Yeah, is this with the one at the airport?
Yeah, no, that was later on, but this was, and so the idea of me not training, not running, I couldn't cope with. So I literally couldn't even weight bear, but I ran 365 days of the year, every year. And I got home from the doctor. I was about 15. And the thing is, I went from being morbidly obese, you know, 4 kilos at 14. And then at 15, a year later, I was this lean, fit, strong, like athletic machine compared to what I was before. And all of a sudden I was popular. All of a sudden I was picked first or second for sporting teams, not last. All of a sudden I wasn't socially invisible. All of a sudden I had self-esteem and confidence. All of a sudden I didn't feel like shit. I felt amazing. And then this injury was going to take all of that from me. So I was never going to let that happen. So I got out at about 10 o'clock at night when mum and dad were in bed. I opened the window. I climbed out the window because I was going to go for a run with my, I nearly said the F word then, but with my injured foot. And I lived in the country, so you could run up and down the streets. It didn't matter in the middle of the night. And I tried to run, and it was just obviously agony. Like I thought, I don't care how much it hurts, I'm going to run. This is how ridiculous I was. And obviously I couldn't run. It was excruciating. And I walked over to the side of the street and I started to walk back with my injured foot in the gutter. And I realized that when I had my foot on a certain ankle, the pain was a 5 out of 10, not a 15. Then I thought, oh, maybe I could jog it with one foot in the gutter. And I jogged, and it was painful, but not unbearable. And so I spent the next month sneaking out the window at night, running with one foot in the gutter, because I was so addicted and I was so dependent on this look and feel and this whatever that I had going, that the thought of not doing that was terrifying. And so, you know, for me, I did some work with Mick for a couple of years at Dayhab, and, you know, worked with the people in the program. I'm an exercise scientist. I'm doing a PhD in exercise in neuropsychology, but my background is working with bodies primarily. So I would talk to them about, you know, all the health variables, all the fitness and strength, and mostly in the physical space, of course. But what was interesting for me was, you know, understanding the way that people with addiction issues think and communicate, and their culture and the way that they interact and the world that they live in. And it was interesting because I rocked up day one, and I'm about to talk and interact and connect for 2 hours with this group of people in a room. And I'm like, well, this will be a no-brainer because this is what I do. I'm a professional speaker. I'm a coach. I've worked with elite athletes, not nearly as much as Sandy, but blokes in prison, all of that, cops, military, you know. So I've done lots of work with lots of people, but I'd never worked with a room full of addicts. And I started talking to them, and 2 hours went by and I realized I didn't do a good job at all. And they weren't into it. And then I came back a week later and it was slightly better. And a week later, it was maybe slightly better, but it actually took me about, I would say, 2 months before I understood how to create connection with addicts and how to understand them. And like I said before, their culture and their thinking and their communication and their preparedness to trust an outsider. They didn't trust me. They didn't like me at the start. They didn't trust me. And it wasn't until I got vulnerable and real and started to talk about my own BS with them that they started to connect. And I realized, and this is true for communication with lots of different groups, not just addicts, but you know, you can have 3 PhDs, you can have all the knowledge, you can have the highest IQ in the world, you can have the best intentions, but if you can't connect with the people or the person that you're talking to, that if you can't communicate, if you can't speak their language, if you don't understand the window through which they view and experience the world, then you can't create great outcomes. And so interestingly, in the first month or two that I was working with all the boys and girls at Dayhab, they taught me more than I taught them. So, you know, and it's a privilege, and it's really, really interesting because it's not a place that I come from. But yeah, it was a steep learning curve for me.
It's interesting, like your story when you were, you know, you felt addicted to exercising and staying fit. It can come in so many different forms, and like, you know, like you said, there's gambling, there's food, there's alcohol, there's so many different ways in which addiction can come into our lives and take over. But Linda asked a question, and I wanted to ask it as well, because going back to what Mick said in terms of where his tipping point was to change, he felt as though he needed to hit rock bottom before there was a trigger to change. What if someone here is listening, or any of us want to make that decision to change before they hit rock bottom? Where do they go? What do they do? What are the first steps? Who wants to answer? Mick, do you want to have a go at this one?
Well, the first step, I guess, is to talk about what's going on. You know, the first step to getting any help is to actually admit that there's a problem. You know, and this is, and if we're talking addiction, so I'm not talking, well, you know, look, I've accidentally, you know, I've had a couple of, you know, drinks and I'm a little bit, you know, I just kind of want to, you know, change my lifestyle a little bit and moderate it or something like that. That's a different kettle of fish. But if we're talking addiction and the person's coming to a point, like rock bottoms don't have to be physical rock bottoms either. It can just be like, I've had enough. Psychological, emotional rock bottoms. You know, that's the time to, first of all, admit what's going on, like speak to somebody, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a professional, it doesn't matter who. But the second that we tell someone that we've got a problem and that we need help, then the solution journey begins. It actually begins. The solution journey cannot begin until the person at first admits there's a problem and second asks for some sort of help. There's lots of places to go for help. You can Google. You could talk to Sandy.
Yes.
You can talk to me. And there's, you know, and you can talk to your GP. You can talk to a counsellor. You can talk to anybody. You can talk to mum. You can talk to dad. You can talk to your partner, your siblings, whoever it is. And then once that's happened, once the person sort of, you know, makes that statement, you know, the horse is bolted. You know, it's the secret's out there, and then it's, you know, it's harder to then hide it than it is to do something about it.
I'm sure there's a lot of bravery it would take to take that first step in having that conversation and not being able to, you know, turn back after you've said it. And
oh yeah, and look, listening to something like this is so important, because see, one of the things with addiction is that people, you know, if not physically, certainly they emotionally and psychologically isolate. You know, and we don't tell anyone what's going on. You know, one of the key things with addiction is we don't really tell anyone what's going on. And if we do tell you, it's only to manipulate you. So we'll only tell you the bit that we want you to know so that we can get what we want. Right? So dishonesty, and I don't mean, it's not necessarily dishonesty in terms of stealing something, but dishonesty in terms of, you know, withholding the truth, not really saying what's going on. trying to present as a certain way, but inside, I mean, addicts and alcoholics are the masters of saying, you say, how you going, mate? Oh, yeah, not bad. Really, this morning I was thinking of killing myself, but yeah, not bad. Going all right, thanks, mate. We don't say what's going on, because what will that mean? How will that make me look? And this is my problem. I need to fix it myself. And very, very, very few and far between. One in hundreds of thousands that can actually recognise the problem and just fix it themselves. And even then, I would seriously doubt if truly, the true sense of the word, are addicts. But maybe they are. I can't guarantee that. But, so we need help. We need help to get clean and sober. And that takes a level of self-honesty. It's really frightening to be self-honest, because, we live a life in active addiction, in denial, and denial obviously isn't when you don't know something. Denial is when you know something, but you pretend it's not happening. No, I'm not looking over there because I know that the problem's there. I'm looking over here. That's denial, denying the problem. So the first step in changing, in any sort of change, and Craigie Boy knows this when it comes to, when it comes to food, when it comes to exercising, when it comes to business, when it comes to addiction, it doesn't matter what it is. Got to face the truth, got to get honest. We've got to break through that denial. And that's why the first step is admitting and saying and talking to someone about it.
And also, I might chuck in that, like, the idea of recovery is not the same as the experience of recovery. Like, the idea is easy. The theory is easy. Even saying it's not easy, but it's way easier than the journey. And it's like, everybody's got things that they want to change. And, I live in the world largely of personal and professional development. And I've spent my life talking to people who tell me about the things that they're going to do that never actually do it. Like, we're always intending and planning and wanting and hoping and finger crossing and talking, but the actual to genuinely look up, own up, step up and do the work and keep showing up every day and being vulnerable and being raw and being real and being humble and being honest and owning your own bullshit and not pretending and not lying and not deflecting. That's just hard. And people, like, we don't fix this stuff in 8 minutes, Mick's 20 years clean and sober, and it's still, he still goes to meetings. He still does work, and he still is aware that he's one drink away from relapsing. I don't think he ever will, and I'm proud of him and love him. But, it's for people who have that predisposition, it's work. And for people who are in the middle of addiction, my very limited observation is that, it is something that requires tremendous, as Mick said, support and encouragement, but also on the part of the person, just a willingness to get uncomfortable, because it is going to hurt. It is not going to be fun, quick, easy, painless, or comfortable or convenient. And we love, in our culture, we love familiarity, we love instant gratification, we love pleasure, we love comfort, we love all this stuff. And getting clean is the opposite of all of that. So we're always going to do it soon, and then it's a decade.
Exactly.
Sandy, what does the solution journey look like to you when you have someone who has come to seek your help? How do you start with them?
Well, I think both Mick and Craig touched on two things that I really want to reaffirm and reinforce. As really anyone who sort of has the courage to make a phone call to me or to any counsellor, anybody, is how goddamn brave these people are. And I carry that bravery deeply in me as a clinician. And it's very interesting to see, well, the journey, what they need, what they want. I think one of the biggest things that we haven't talked about, and something that is sort of etched in my grave when I die, is the capacity to self-soothe and self-regulate. And I think people who are addicts have missed that. So their self-esteem, their worldview of themselves of, can I manage myself? Can I cope with myself? Can I regulate my life, is just a gaping hole. So their self-esteem, no doubt, is down the toilet. So there's so many pathways in how I deal with it, but certainly at the sort of the neon sign on my forehead when I'm doing is, how do we get this person to self-soothe and self-regulate in a pro-social, calm, non-toxic manner for them? And that's probably my guiding therapeutic pathway. If I had to condense it into one sort of minute. Interesting, when I was in prison, you know, certainly MAPS, and MAPS is the Melbourne Assessment Prison, which is in Spencer Street. So every prisoner in Victoria goes there. And it's very different to Barwon. Barwon's like a sort of a holiday camp. It's all calm, it's peaceful, relatively, believe it or not. But in MAPS, they're all crazy because they're coming off the streets. And what we do when they're really, you know, drunk is we put them in the cell and they get Valium, and that's it. And they engage in lots of head banging and lots of, you know, hurtful behaviour to themselves. But the interesting thing for me from when they were cleaner was they didn't know how to deal with their emotions. They go, I feel sad. And I go, yep, I feel happy. And they didn't know. So their quick fix is, I hit the drugs, I hit alcohol, I do some antisocial activity, because they didn't understand how to deal with feelings. And we have this delusion that we're supposed to be happy all the time. It's this crap that happiness is an end state of how we live. Happiness is a byproduct of everything we do. And it's interesting, I'm also doing my PhD, and part of that PhD discussion is about narrating recovery and the stories we tell ourselves and how we empower ourselves, and the stories we give ourselves and allow ourselves to tell is really a very, and everyone has a story, and it's a really powerful attribute in terms of recovery or remission, whatever word you want to use.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's that element of looking at the person and then giving them the support. But there's obviously, and I'm conscious of people here tonight who are dealing with loved ones who are struggling with addiction and perhaps not knowing how to address starting that support for them, and what language to use, and you know, how to get them to that first point of owning up and breaking the denial. What do they do? Where is the guidance for them? Where can they start?
Well, a good place to start is look, there's lots of services that family members can access, you know, to help them to understand how to, you know, I guess be able to address the issues, you know, with their loved ones. You know, like there's a wonderful group around called Families Anonymous. And it's just a group of family members who meet, who have all been in the boat or are in the boat of having a loved one that's involved in addiction, and they're struggling to deal or to be able to handle that person. It's great to get that sort of support. But when it comes to actually, like, I guess, how does the loved one sort of, you know, intervene? How do they help that person that's suffering from addiction? Well, my first, you know, piece of advice is don't do it alone. Like, don't just wing it and go in there and plead for, look, if you know, don't you see how much I love you? Don't you see what we're doing to help you here? Can you not see that? I mean, that sort of language, that sort of talking, that sort of approach doesn't work. It really doesn't work. You know, I would encourage any family member to ring or to make contact with any drug and alcohol service or any counsellor. Certainly if they rang our drug and alcohol service, I mean, you know, one of the first things we do is talk to family members, because it's never the addict that rings themselves. It's always the family member, or nearly always the family member. You know, and the first thing is they want to, that if the family member knew what to do, it would be okay, but they don't know what to do. They need help. And so they ring us and we say, okay, so we get a snapshot of the situation and exactly what they're going through. And we say, and we give them some strategies to handle the approach, to address the issue with their loved one, to bring it to a head, but do it in a way that's loving, non-accusing, but just laying it out there, but not avoiding the issue either. You know, there are ways to do it. I mean, we could do a whole session on how to approach a loved one, you know, and do an hour and a half on that easily, because it really depends on the situation, you know. But you know, timing's important as well. You know, we have a saying: we don't talk to the bottle or to the drug, because you're not talking to the person. When a person's using and drinking, if they're in active addiction, they're going through cycles, you know, and the cycle when they're intoxicated or when they're using, and they may seem to be more verbal and maybe they seem to be more approachable, but you're not talking to the real person. The time to approach someone who's suffering from an addiction is at that moment. So if we just talk the drinker for a second, you know, the next morning when the drinker wakes up and they've got you know, their vision's jumpy and hands are shaking a little bit, and you know, looking out the window to see, you know, is there any dents in the car, and I can't believe I've done this. Hey, that's the time. Now we're talking real deal. The person's sober and they're absolutely faced with the reality of what has gone on the night before. Okay, so one of the key things that we try to help families bring to their loved ones, or get their loved ones to come to, is to actually acknowledge and really truly see the true predicament they're in and the consequences of what that is. Because it's when the addict themselves can touch that, that's when they're at their most what's the word? I don't like saying vulnerable, but it's certainly at the point where they're most approachable and the most open and supple, if you like. Receptive, Craig. Thank you. Thank goodness for that.
That'll be $5. I'll send you an invoice.
No worries. I'll put it on the fridge.
Yeah. I mean, I assume when you're deep into addiction, consequences don't really come into play, do they? Until those timing moments that you talk about.
Well, that's right. So consequences come into play when it hurts you. You know, we like to think, I'm really hurt my mum and dad, and I've hurt my kids and all this. And that's true. We do feel a bit for that. But when I get hurt, when I'm sitting in the nick in maximum security at the MAP, which I've done many tours of that. Thank you, Sandy. You know, when you're sitting in the nick and a cold, hard reality of where you are hits you, it's horrendous. Now, you don't have to go to that extreme, but I'm just saying, you know, when the person's in that moment, it's a really good time to approach, you know. And, you know, the key to one of the keys to recovery, because there's so many, we must have a big key reading there, but anyway, one of the keys to recovery, and when you know someone is truly on the path to recovery, is when they cease being a victim and start taking responsibility for our own actions, you know, and that's kind of where a person's at when they can hit that rock bottom. Is they're hurting so much that they realise they've got to take some responsibility. They've got to do something. You know, there's no fairies. They're going to come and wave the magic wand and drop the fairy dust and make everything okay anymore. And that's why it's really important that families try not to, and this is very difficult, they try not to enable that loved one, because enabling means mop up the mess behind them, so the person does not need to face the consequences of what they've been doing. And we can all fall into that, because you go, oh yeah, but if I do, they're going to lose their home, or their wife will leave, or but they need to feel those consequences, because unfortunately us addicts, we just don't truly do something about this until we're hurting bad enough. And we've all got our different ways that we need to hurt bad enough. You know, so enabling just prolongs that. It just, you know, and the longer that a person continues on the cycle of addiction, the more likely they are to move into that fatal stage. You know, it's a fatal illness. At the end, a lot of people pass away from addiction. You know, I have to tell this, it's not a nice story, but I'll just quickly tell this. I had a wonderful young man who came through my program and got clean and sober. His name is Marcus. He's 36 years old. He came through my program. He wasn't 36 then, he was about 32 then, or 31. Came through my program. He did really well. He stayed clean and sober. He went back to school. He got qualified as a drug and alcohol support worker. You know, got his diploma, and he came back and worked for me. He was an unbelievable support worker. He was the best support worker I reckon I've ever had. It was just fantastic with people, right? Around 6 weeks ago, I noticed some behaviour change, and he'd lost a lot of weight, and he started pulling out of taking shifts every now and then at the last minute, which was unlike him. This particular night, about 6 weeks ago, it was a Friday night, about 3 hours before his shift was about to start to be a support worker overnight, he rang up and cancelled his shift. And we were quite upset with that, right? Put us in a bit of a predicament. And anyway, unfortunately, this story is not a good one. He was found in a park the next morning dead. He'd relapsed and accidentally overdosed, you know, and passed away. That's the seriousness of what we're dealing with. This, I cannot tell you how many people I know of already this year, I personally know of and have touched, that have passed away from addiction. It's true. It's real. This happens. So it's really important that if we have a loved one that is suffering from addiction, the way I see it anyway, is I need to get that person to face the reality of where they're at quickly. The longer I let it go on, the more chance they end up like Marcus, you know. And life is precious. Our loved ones are our loved ones, and sometimes doing the loving thing is the hard thing. And I'm not talking about horrendous stuff. I'm just talking about, listen, sweetheart, I can't give you money. I'll take you to the shops and buy you some food, right? No, I'm not putting petrol in your car this time. You're going to have to face the facts that you've blown your dough. Okay, so that type of stuff, that's a really good start, you know. And when it comes to trying helping a loved one that's going through addiction, it's really important that when they're approached, like how pointless is it going to someone saying, listen, I know you've got an addiction and I want you to get help. And it ends there. You need to go with a plan. You've got to have a solution in hand. It's pointless going confronting someone and having nothing to offer in terms of a pathway to move forward, because the person that's suffering the addiction, they're not going to be able to, you know, one of the things that happens with addiction is that really simple things pile up into huge mountains and they become unworkable in the mind of the addict. Simple things like go and put your dole form in, ring up the electricity company and get an extension on your bill, ring your boss and say that you're not, you know, that you're sick and you're not coming into work today. These things become astonishingly difficult for people that are suffering from addiction. So to go and approach someone and say you need to get help, yet not provide an avenue for that help, it's really not setting up a good scenario, you know. And if the person really knew how to help themselves, because let's face it, most people that suffer from addiction, if they're truly honest, they're bewildered by it. They know that they're better than that. They know they're good people. Not everyone, but a lot. They know they're good people. They go, I did it. I went, I'm smarter than this. What's wrong with me? You know, what's wrong with me? Why can't I? I'm a pathetic human being. I can't even go and get a dole check. What an idiot. You know, and so, you know, when you're living hopeless within yourself like that, no one else externally may know that, but when you're living hopelessly within yourself like that, you know, it's important to have some sort of an answer, to have some sort of an avenue. So, you know, if you know somebody like Sandy, or you've made contact with someone like Dayhab, right? And you make those calls first and say, hey, listen, I've got a loved one. They're suffering from addiction. I want to try and help them. I don't know when it's going to come off, but can you help me with some strategies to approach them? And if I do get to approach them, are you receptive? Can I bring them to see you? You know, and then just set that up first. So your timing, your action plan, and then do it. And your boundaries, you know, your tough love, but not tough love. Tough love, by the way, I have to clarify this. Tough love isn't being mean. Tough love is loving someone and doing something because it's the best thing for them. That's tough love, you know, and the best thing for yourself. You know, normally when we do the most loving, best thing for ourselves, it's normally good for the people that are around us. Work that one out. But it is, right? It really is, because if we're loving and true to ourselves, then it will rub off on the other people, and we won't. Loving of ourselves doesn't mean we're selfish. Doesn't mean we don't care about anyone else and it's all me, 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 the old song, me, 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 me. It's not me, 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 me. It just means, you know, I need to acknowledge when something's really hard for me and I can't go down that avenue, and then I can be honest about it. And that helps that person to understand that that's where I'm at, and that I won't put up with anything other than what's comfortable for me. It helps the other person come to the brink of their circumstances and accept where they're at.
Some powerful words there: the timing, the language, the tough love, and the not enabling. I think really big takeaways. Sandy, when it comes to relapse, which Mick brought on, raised here tonight, talked about relapse. Many times it's not just a straight path to recovery, is it? There's much more to it, and that relapse is very common. How have you seen that with clients, and what's your mechanisms to support that?
I think it's really covered very clearly with what Mick's just talked about. You know, if the timing's not right, and in my language we call that being treatment ready. You know, when you've hit rock bottom, you know.
Treatment ready, I like that.
Do you like that?
I do.
You know, and
I'm going to put that in my back pocket.
You keep that one in. And treatment resistant is the converse of that. And treatment ready, every single person who just about rings me up and says, I've seen so-and-so, blah, 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 and they're a dickhead. And I go, well, they might have been a dickhead, but I bet you what was going on was that you're probably the dickhead and you weren't ready for doing whatever the psychologist or counsellor or drug and alcohol counsellor was suggesting to you. So being treatment ready is pivotal. And if you look at the framework of what is comorbid, as I said before, with drug and alcohol abuse, is mental ill health. That is, like, it's very rare for one to stand on its own without comorbidity. So when we talk about, you know, regression, you know, are those mental ill health needs being met first of all? Because for me, that's the overarching problem, and the addiction. It's like we've got an umbrella for mental ill health, whatever word you want to use, and then the addiction, risky behaviour, violence, all that sort of stuff comes largely under that umbrella. And I think Mick's also made another really good point. I was just reading a statistic today, looking at what's called a systematic review, which is looking at all the literature, and 58% only survive substance abuse. So what Mick is saying is, you know, the alternative is death. So they're really harsh figures, and they're a real reality. So what do we do? You know, as Mick said, that treatment ready, being ready, having people around who can nurture and support these people. But also, it's like leading a horse to the trough. Unless they have this capacity to feel confident in themselves, and I think that's really one thing that really strikes me in all the prisoners I've looked at, the women I've dealt with. It's just this overarching and dreadful lowered confidence in their own capacity.
Yeah.
And that's something that is something I give a lot of time and effort to.
Sandy, you know, a lot of people that come to treatment that I've been involved with over the last 18 years, not all, but there's a big percentage that come in that we would call treatment resistant.
Mhm.
And what's played a really good part, and so I just to clear this up, so what's played a really good part, like from my perspective, just my perspective, I don't care how someone gets to rehab. I don't give a shit. I don't care whether they're treatment ready or treatment resistant or just, whatever. I don't care as long as they get there, because I see that as, as a treatment centre, that is my role.
Yep.
To produce and incite a deep and profound shift in thinking and emotion where that person actually wants their recovery. Right? And so it's not always possible. We know that. And people that come in treatment ready, I mean, they're fantastic to work with. They're magic, because they're ready and they're doing it. And some people are treatment resistant. And I'll just give you a quick example of that. And I don't know, it can provide hope for people as well. Because a lot of people out there that have loved ones that are suffering from addiction, suffering from addiction doesn't mean the loved one's out there going, oh no, what am I going to do? I'm an addict, so what can't. No, what it means is that I'm running amok, causing havoc, destroying everything and everyone around me, and I don't care. I want to keep going. And the loved ones are going, oh my God, this is going to end really badly. Now what do I do? And it's not a simple, easy fix. But, I had a young gentleman that was in my program. He was doing 90 days. And, oh my God. Look, I'm not mentioning his name, so I can say this, right? But, man, he was just an absolute little prick, right? Like, he was just, he was so hard to work with, right? Like, he just caused probably just absolutely, we bailed him out of prison, right? So I do a lot of work before the courts and get guys bailed to me to go through treatment. And he was one of them. And we're about 38 days in to a 90-day program, and this guy just absolutely fought tooth and nail the whole way. Like it was just, I was on the brink. I was within days of just going, you know what, call the informant, get him out of here, send him back to the Nick. And but he hadn't met me, and this is where rapport and connection is everything. Now he hadn't met me. And I decided, look, he really disturbed the whole community. So the whole community was just all negative and, it was just an awful feeling. I thought, I've got to go and right the ship. So I went down as the CEO and I said, right, I'm going to do a talk. And I shared my story. And then I talked a bit about addiction and all that sort of stuff. And as I was sharing my story, this guy's eyes, like I just saw a change in him. It was just unbelievable. And, after I'd finished, he came up to me and he said, this is the best day of my life. I said, what? He said, what you just said here today is the best thing I've ever heard. He said, I related to everything. And he said, I'm going to give it everything I've got. I said, okay. And you know what? That guy became probably my most favourite client in the rehab I reckon I've ever had. And at the end of his treatment, he was in tears because he couldn't believe that I made, there's no sacrifice at all, but he couldn't believe that I made the sacrifice to come in and again come down from my office and come into the treatment room on his graduation where he's finishing his 90 days and be there to hug him and tell him I was proud of him and be there for him, So this connection is everything. And I always say in counselling, if don't have rapport, you got nothing.
Yeah.
No rapport, no counselling.
I want to flip the script a little bit here because I know that there's different people in this room tonight who you've spoken about extreme cases of addiction, all of you tonight, and where there's criminal elements and all of that and the recovery, and it's a really important conversation. But I want to talk about the different levels of addiction and perhaps someone who might feel as though they're not sure whether they're addicted to something, or they can't stop at 1 or 2 or 3 drinks when they start, and they have this dependency on alcohol, but they don't really see it as a problem yet, but perhaps if they keep going in this way, you know, those 3-4 wines every night or those 4-5 wines every night may become a problem. Like, is addiction, when does it become from a dabbling situation to an addiction, and what are the warning signs that we might look out for? I don't know who wants to answer that.
You want to go, Sandy?
No, you go. Or Craig.
Handball.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, that's a really good question. And so firstly, you're exactly right, Maritza, like we have spoken about extreme cases tonight. But I have to be honest and say that, like, addiction affects all walks of life. So in terms of, you know, the type of, you know, clientele that has come through my treatment centre over the last 10 years, well, I can tell you I've had a magistrate, I've had priests, I've had police officers, I have had, you know, elderly housewives, I've had tradies, criminals, professionals, 40-year-old professionals, like every walk of life. Addiction doesn't discriminate. And because someone, you know, has it together or starts to question whether they've got a problem, well, first of all, people that don't have a problem normally don't question whether they've got a problem. All right, so you don't need to control something unless it's a bit out of control. So that's a first warning sign. If I'm sort of having a look and going, gee, I wonder how I could control this a little bit better, then it's somewhat out of control. So it's already begun. The warning sign's already there. If a person is drinking and, you know, it's costing them more than money, meaning it's not just about what they're drinking or how many, but it's about how it's making them feel. It's about how, you know, they're conducting themselves or what it's, you know, what it's causing them to do. Sometimes people will only have a few drinks, but they won't go out and visit family. They can't drive, so they won't go and visit family, or that causes them that disconnect from their loved ones. That is, you know, a clear-cut warning sign that there may be some sort of problem there. And if the person is unable to, you know, make a change by themselves, then it is time to seek some help, you know. And like we were saying, there's many ways to seek help, you know. And the first step really is talking about it with someone. And a lot of people want to keep this stuff private. They don't really want to go and talk to family members or raise an alarm if they think, well, maybe there's a chance I'm not, you know, it's just the beginning. It's a bit of a hiccup. And so I just kind of want to keep this private. And that's fair enough too. That's why there's professionals out there. This is why, you know, seek out a GP, seek out a counsellor, somebody to approach, to just talk about it. Get the conversation happening.
Get it happening early. I like
Can I
it.
ask a question, Maritza?
I'd love you to, Craig. Yeah.
So either for Sandy or Mick, what if, you know, somebody in your family, loved one, or even a friend that you're close to obviously has an issue, be that booze or drugs or something else, but they deny they have an issue, and they absolutely flat out go, I do not have a problem, and they're kind of functional, and every time you raise it, it just creates, you know, a problem. What can we do?
Yeah, that's a good one, and that is a tough situation. That is a common situation too. So, and it's a real problem for families. And look, there really isn't an easy answer to it. You know, there's no kind of quick, yep, this is what you do, and that'll fix it. But if we clearly know that a family member has an issue, right, then there's a reason we clearly know it, because there's some obvious stuff happening. So again, it's about the timing of when that person's approached, you know, and there will be a time, mark my words, if the person really does have an issue, like you were just saying, there will come a moment in time where they're on the downward spiral rather than the upward spiral of having the issue and using and drinking. There'll come a moment in time when they're at their low point, and that's the time to approach, whether that's after, you know, an incident happening. It usually takes some sort of an incident. It doesn't have to be anything much, but just some sort of an incident happening, and that can be the time to approach that person and say, look, you know, and depending on how worried you are too, Craig, you know, like if you had a family member that you thought, if we don't do something about this, there's going to be trouble, then it's time to be honest and just say, you know what, doesn't matter what you tell me, I know you've got a problem, right? And that's where we can start to set boundaries, you know, and one boundary, there's millions, but one boundary could be, look, I'm not comfortable with this, so keep it to me. I'm not comfortable with this. Whether you admit you've got a problem or not, I know you do, and I can't live like that. So if you want to continue to live here, I want you to. If you want to continue to live here, then I need you to make a call to Sandy or to Mick, and I want you to at least have an initial consultation to just make sure that you're okay. Simple as that.
Non-threatening timing.
Sorry, one quick question. How long did it take from when you last used to when you felt somewhat confident that you wouldn't use again? How long was that?
Oh, I hate those questions.
Good question.
I don't really care though. I mean, I think I know the answer, but I just want people to get their head around it. Like, so you last used 20 years ago, give or take. At what stage did you feel confident that you wouldn't use again? Or do you still not feel that?
Yeah, look, I don't look at it. See, right from the very word go, I didn't look at it as in never using again and or anything like that, you know, and I think I see that as, in terms of addiction, I see that as an arrogance. And pride always comes before a fall. So I prefer to stay humble. You become teachable. And so this is an ongoing journey done at a day at a time, you know. And so I just know that I don't need to worry about the rest of my life. I know I don't need to worry about in 10 years' time. I'm just worried about now. But I'm not worried, you know. So it's funny, you start off like that, like a day at a time, and you're hanging in there, and when I get to 1 year clean and sober, you know, then everything will be okay. And, you know, thank goodness, you know, it's never going to be a problem again. And then you just keep going, you keep rolling on, and then it becomes a non-issue, you know. But I've got to do many things in my life today to maintain my sobriety, because I know without a shadow of a doubt that addiction is a very, very slippery beast. And the snake is always in the grass. There's no cure to addiction. What we do, it's like diabetes, right? We get some treatment, we get an ongoing management plan, and if we stick to that ongoing management plan, we can live life almost as if it didn't exist. If I got diabetes and I, you know, go and see my nutritionist, I change my diet, I change my lifestyle, I lose the weight, I join the gym, I eat well, you know, I do all the right things, there's a high probability that I'll be able to live my life pretty well with diabetes, but hardly even know that I've got it. And it's the same deal with addiction. But just like diabetes, if I get 5 years down the track and I start eating Maccas every night and munging out on chockies, and I don't exercise and I allow the weight to come back on, and I've stopped checking, you know, testing my blood sugar and, you know, all that sort of stuff, there's a high chance that I'll relapse into diabetes again. And get quite unwell.
Through actually, that I think it's a really great question. Can you share with us some of the things that you use daily to maintain your own personal sobriety that work for you?
Yep. So I stay very, very well connected. So connection is a huge thing in my life. So I stay connected with other people that are in recovery as well, but are further, just where I am. New people as well. So helping new people to get clean and sober is part of giving away to keep it, you know, like I've got to give away what I've got in order to be able to keep evolving myself. But also being around people that are further down the track than me. Yeah, being of service. The other thing that I do is that I do lots of things, but, you know, I do morning readings. I do meditation. You know, I use a method that allows me to self-analyze and to make sure that, you know, I'm not going down certain tracks in my mind. So certain tracks in terms of self-pity, resentment, fear, that sort of stuff. It's a continual journey. You know, I still have addictive traits. I still have the addictive personality. I've still got that weird mind where everyone's thinking that way, but my mind thinks that way. You know, it goes left, doesn't go right. You know, and so I've learned, you know, new skills to be able to live with that. I've got to continually keep working these things in my life to keep developing as a person. And it's it's a wonderful journey because, you know, I get to grow as a person. I get to live to my full potential. I get to, you know, explore who I am, understand myself, understand how I tick. You know, I get to, you know, Craigie Boy talks about this a bit, you know, but, you know, when you sort of like thinking about thinking, or you're observing yourself, you know, sort of observing yourself operating in your life, and you can kind of critique it and go, no, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to change that next time. So you get that ability because of self-development, because I'm not drinking, because I'm hungry for life, because I'm hungry for, you know, my potential. You know, I want to reach that. So working these things into my life, you know, it evolves over time, you know, and it's an ongoing journey. So one thing I love about recovery is it's a journey. It's not a destination. It doesn't come to an end until they're patting you on the face with a shovel.
Someone who didn't go to school very long, Mick, you're a very wise man.
Thank you.
Powerful words. I want to just ask this question. We touched on it at the start, and it's about the genetic component to addiction. So if our parents have been through their own addiction story, will we have the tendencies naturally that we will sort of roll into this pathway as well? Have you seen that a lot, Sandy? Have you seen that a lot, Mick or Craig at Dayhab? Has it happened in your experience?
We go, Sandy.
I haven't seen a lot of it in my experience, because my experience has certainly mainly been with adults who are older, not rather than adolescents or young people in their early 20s. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't really, or a geneticist, so I don't really know. I can only say intuitively, which I don't think is very professional, but so I can't give you a clear answer on that. There is argument that it's the nature, you know, it's the nature versus nurture argument, that our environment, what we learn, we repeat. And then there's, of course, the obvious, because of our environment, I'm choosing not to go down that pathway. I would hazard a guess and say the geneticist would typically say that it is not a genetic trait. The psychologist would say it's more environment and nurture rather than inherent. But Craig might have a different view on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right for the most part. I think there's a lot of, I think for the most part, it's situation, circumstance, environment, nurture, and all of that. But also there is, and I think Mick thinks this as well, I think there can be a biochemical element to it in terms of some people just, it's like, I remember Mick telling me he never felt normal or right. And then he took his first drink and he felt like for what him was right and normal. And so some people don't naturally produce as much dopamine as other people.
Sure. Yeah.
And so their brain chemistry is somewhat atypical. And I think, did you say, mate, there's something like about 10% of the population you think are predisposed biologically or genetically?
Yep.
Yeah. I'd accept that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So but it's a mix of things, isn't it? It's like, you know, the funny thing is I grew up with parents who drank all the time and smoked all the time. And all it did was make me not want to smoke or drink because I thought it stunk and it was horrible.
Yeah, but Craig, I'm going to come back at you that one. I'm going to say, thank goodness you didn't drink, because knowing your past history and you running down that gutter, right, running down at night with that foot in the gutter, okay, I'm raps you didn't drink or use, because I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that there may have been a problem sitting in there.
Oh,
and you would be susceptible. So what can happen is that some people can drink themselves into alcoholism.
Yes.
And some people instantly. I was instant. Okay. So some people's brains, okay, cannot withstand that dopamine dump and everything else that happens when the person drinks. They have that trigger of that dopamine, that pleasure pathway in the brain, all those different neurochemicals and whatever else happens in the brain. And some people's brains can handle, it, and those neuro pathways aren't formed in the brain as quickly as some others. And I think when it comes to the genetic component, that's the way I would see it. Not so much it's hereditary because mum and dad have got it, but maybe, like your brain's texture, or I don't know how to explain it because I'm not a neuroscientist or anything like that, but maybe, your brain's texture or your neurological pathways are more susceptible to being formed from drinking than someone else. But one thing I can say is that a lot of people can, a lot of people can drink for a long time and not be alcoholics, but then move into that state, later on in life. And that sort of fits with that theory, I think.
I agree. I 100% would have been an addict because I have addictive and like with everything, like when I started bodybuilding, I was just an addict doing something different. And there may have been a few chemicals involved at some stage. There may.
And that goes to show too that, addiction isn't just about drugs and alcohol. What about gambling? What about sex? What about food? What about porn?
What about
all
work?
That sort of stuff? Because it produces the dopamine response in the brain, which the addict is seeking. The addict is seeking the dopamine. The substance is the symptom. The dopamine is the target, because that shuts down the itty bitty shitty committee, that fills the hole in the soul, that caps off or accentuates the feelings, and that buries all the past baggage. And as soon as a person stops gambling, tries to not eat shit anymore and have it, go into a diet or whatever, not comfort eat or whatever else, or train or anything else, the brain starts to crave that dopamine because all those feelings, the internal condition comes back, and we need to feel it again. And that's why people cross addict. That's why people go, yeah, look, I'm not using drugs anymore or drinking, but all of a sudden I'm down the pokies every night, or I'm addicted to falling in love, or I'm addicted to whatever it is, codependency. You name it. You can roll out the list. But I think
you and I worked with a well-known sporting identity called David Schwartz, who's spoken publicly about this, so I can say it. But he went from the punt. When I was working with him at SEN, he'd never smoked. He took up smoking in his 30s, and he was having like 50 a day. Then he gave those up. He'd never drunk coffee. Then he started coffee. He's having like 30 coffees a day. And then he went to lollies. And then he would eat like a kilo of lollies a day. I'd walk past the studio. He'd be sitting in there with a gigantic bag of snakes doing radio, just chewing on snakes. There's that tendency.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
100%.
Nick, can I ask you, in terms of your maintenance program that you're talking about before, your own maintenance program, what you do on a daily basis, do you feel that as each day progresses that your self-determination increases? Is that part of the package or not?
My self-determination, do you mean in terms of staying clean and sober?
No, in terms of I can.
Yeah, look at waivers. I'm human, and it wavers up and down. I guess the stuff that I do in my life, what it does is it provides a discipline for me, and no matter sort of no matter what's going on for me in my life, I do what I do in my recovery life, whether I feel like it or not, whether I feel like I'm gaining or not gaining. I feel great. I feel great being 20 years clean and sober. It's an amazing feeling, but I also know I'm not immune. When I was 16 years sober, clean and sober, I was sitting in an aeroplane heading to the Gold Coast, and there was a young man sitting next to me. I was against the window, Jetstar flight, and the waitress was coming down the aisle and asked him if he wanted a drink, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll have a Jim Beam." And she handed him a can of Jim Beam and a cup with ice, and he went to pay for it, and his card didn't work on the machine, and he was most upset. He was going to have to give the Jim Beam back. And I said to him, "Look, mate, don't worry about it. I'll buy it for you." Right? So I gave the lady the card, bang, tapped it, no worries. He's got his Jim Beam, cracked it open, poured it in his cup. I could smell it, and bugger me dead, I look over and this bloody can's winking at me. You know, it's winking at me. It's just like, "Hey, sweetheart, I'm here." You know, like I'm like, and this terrible feeling came over me. 16 years sober. You know, like addiction's like a sick, seductive, alluring thing that is so bad, yet I want it so much sometimes. And it can happen, you know, and it happened in that moment. And I just went, wish I didn't buy that for that kid. But anyway, so I just looked out the window. It was night time for the whole flight until we landed. And when we landed, you know, I did what I know to do. I rang my best mate, who's 38 years sober. I rang Scottish John and spoke to my best mate and said, "Listen, not because he's got any answers or any special things for me, but I know that with addiction, the second that I don't keep a secret, the second that I reveal what's going on, it loses most of its power." So I was able to tell him, "Hey, listen, I was just sitting on the plane, blah, 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 blah. This is the story that happened. It freaked me out. I didn't feel too good." And he was, "You're all right, mate. You're okay." And so there was a moment, you know, where it came back. But if I hadn't been doing all the things that I do in my recovery and come to where I'd come to in my recovery, believe me, it would have been very easy for me to reach over and just go, "Excuse me, I'll have one of them too."
Yeah. Well, thank you.
If that happens to me, I'm gone.
It's pretty amazing, and there's been some powerful stories and tools that are shared here tonight, and I am conscious of the time because we are wrapping up now. But anyone here listening tonight who has perhaps had a trigger moment or would like to seek some more help, I feel like conversations like this, you know, really help to remove the stigma from addiction. So do reach out to Mick, do reach out to Craig or Sandy. We will provide all of their details in an email tomorrow morning for you that you can connect with them on. And we will be replaying this conversation again as well on our platform. So do listen out for that. Thank you for being part of it, all of you. Invaluable advice and journeys that you've all been on. I'm sure many of us have taken many things from what's been shared here tonight. So I appreciate you all for sharing so openly.
Thank you, Maritza. Can I just also say that there's been a lot of stuff coming through the chats, and I haven't responded to any of them because I just can't do two things at once, and I would lose track, and I would, you know, I'd just be all over the shop if I did that. Yeah. But I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's been, you know, leaving your comments and asking questions and stuff like that. Like, for me, that's a real treat because, you know, I get a buzz out of doing this, but I also, you know, to know that somebody else is getting something out of it, it actually helps me as well. So thank you.
Well, that's beautiful. Again, thank you, everyone. Stay tuned for more from Conscious Conversations and look after yourselves in all of your life journeys and experiences. Thank you so much.